Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Tech Leaders Unplugged. I'm your host, Tullio Siragusa. Good to be here today, back from a little holiday break. Joining me today is Rob Molchon, who is the CTO at Vestwell, excuse me. Pleasure to have you with me this morning, Rob. Good to have you on the show.
Thank you. It's great to meet you, and I'm a big fan of the podcast. I'm happy to be here. It's
Excellent.
funny because usually people mess up my name, not the company name, but you got one right, so that was good.
Yes. So we'll get it right hopefully by the end of the show, right?
Yeah.
So let's talk about today growing engineering organizations. What we're going to focus on is having a blueprint for what's really important. So I'm looking forward to this conversation because it's really critical to have a very good, strong engineering culture and having a good foundation for success. But before we get into the topic, let's get to know you a little bit. Tell us how you got here. Tell us about Vestwell, and we'll dig right in.
Yeah, sure. Will do. It's absolutely not what I thought I'd be doing when I grew up. When I went to college for originally to become a lawyer. And then I thought I was going to go into clinical psychology. I'd always been a programmer since a little kid when I got my Apple IIe in the early 80s. And then while at school, found I had to do all my term papers on this big Unix system and learned a lot about that. And then when I graduated in the early 90s, the only thing I could do was for job. The first thing I found was actually a tech support job for the US's first dial-up internet access. It was a company called Software Tool and Die, and my job was the person to sit there and answer your emails or answer your calls on how to set up Gopher and whatnot. And I kind of didn't know what I was doing, but I learned very quickly, and I had a great opportunity to partner with the experts there. And then throughout my career, I just kind of find myself, I guess I've been really blessed to be in the right space at the right time. I moved to New York. I joined a startup that was an alternative music bulletin board system as sort of the head technical person. Again, probably underqualified. That went into new media. That went into ad tech space. And went from an infrastructure point of view to a software point of view. And I remember I was working for a company called Unicast that did advertising. And I was very frustrated with the way that our requirements and all that stuff worked. And I stumbled across Agile and Scrum in particular. And I was part of the transformation for that company, wound up to become the VP of that company, and so on and so forth. So for the last 20 years, I made that switch from being a programmer to engineering manager or engineering management, for better or for worse. And I've been blessed to be in a lot of different companies that have grown from being like 15, 20 people to over 100, coming in maybe when there's 50 people and growing that to be multi-state, multi-regional, et cetera. And I've just seen a lot of things that I think fit. And I'd like to share that with different aspects of where you are as a company. That's kind of it.
Yeah.
And go ahead.
Looking forward to it because there's different audience members here, might be at different stages of their growth. So I'm sure they'll appreciate learning.
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about Vestwell. What's the company about?
Vestwell so we are dedicated to closing the savings gap here in the U.S. So we started with the small business 401ks. So in the U.S., most people really aren't prepared for retirement. It's just something that, we used to have this pension system where you just get a guaranteed income for life. Then we started having 401ks. And if you're lucky enough to be at a company that offers that, there's a great benefit. But there's tons and tons of small businesses that just aren't served by that market, primarily because the technology involved is old, super complicated, and expensive. So the players, sort of the legacy players, don't find it profitable to serve 401k plans for your pizza parlor, for your dentist office, for 50 to 100 participants in that savings plan. So we came out with an offering. Our CEO recognized this in his last company, what a pain it was to offer this benefit to his employees. And we created our own technology system to make that easier. Since then, we've gone on to incorporate more savings vehicles. There's a few states that are mandating IRA participation for small businesses. So we power that to make that easy and affordable for both the sponsors, those are people offering the plan, and the participants, the people who are saving money. And at this point, we're helping over 300,000 savers save more than $30 billion, and it's just the start, right? There's more things coming in terms of other vehicles for tax advantage savings. We already offer 529s, which is for college and tuition, and there's other things along the way.
Very cool. Well, anytime you're disrupting an old industry with some new ideas, you require innovation, right? So
Yes.
let's dig right into it. Let's get unplugged. So, back to the topic. I think we can agree that cultivating a strong engineering culture is the foundation for success. But
Yep.
what are some of those key elements that make this foundation for success, in your opinion?
Yeah. There's quite a few that you eventually will have to pay attention to. Whether I think it starts with hiring and talent acquisition, right? Training your people on how to do interviews to do them effectively. There is architectural standards. What is the way you want things to work from your platform point of view? There are agile or best practices, team practices, what have you. Ultimately, there's career management. There's audit readiness. If you're in an industry like we are, that's very controlled from an audit perspective. You have security. You have succession planning. You have metrics that you need to capture. You have Jira hygiene if you're using Jira or whatever. CI/CD. There's a ton of things that you have to do. Onboarding for new employees, but you don't have to do it all at once. And so my goal here is really to talk through when those different activities are most effective or most required for your organization, depending on where you are. Really, from a size perspective, is what I found um, most influential. Uh, but also, sometimes you have to layer in both your personal goals and the company goals for how you want the engineering culture to be, as well as the industry that you're in, right? Uh, I would, if I even if I didn't like audits, or I think audits were like not really worth the time, I can't get away from it in my current job. Like we are very, 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 for good reason, under audit from different state agencies, from a SOC 2 compliance perspective, all that stuff, because we're dealing with people's money, and you want to make sure that we are not messing it up. So I totally understand that. But if I were in a different company, maybe I wouldn't spend as much time and effort and money and people on audit readiness. So
Okay, so let's talk about this a little bit. You mentioned one, hiring the right talent,
yeah,
retaining the right talent. You talked about agile development, which is adapting to change and delivering results, but also empowering. I mean,
yep,
the idea of agile is to be self-empowered, and then of course, you also talked about a little bit about succession planning. So it's creating opportunities for people, something to look forward to,
yep,
and then finally, having, I would guess, inclusive and diverse teams as well, right? Depending on
yes,
what's going on in the organization. But you also mentioned knowing what the needs are in the company you're in, right? So you
hmm,
have to adapt to the environment in
yep,
a highly regulated environment such as your company. There's a lot of compliance requirements, which
yes.
creates a different kind of pressure, a different kind of structure within the organization. So how do you balance that, right? Delivering results, being compliant, but also creating an environment that is friendly, fun, perhaps even exciting and opportunistic. How have you found this sort of
Yeah.
secret sauce for that balance?
Well, I think it starts with, if you're the engineering leader or like the CTO, like myself, or maybe a VP of engineering, and maybe not even head of all of engineering, or maybe you're head of QA, you need to understand what the values of the company are from a success perspective.
Mm,
And that's something that will probably change quite radically right now with the economic climate. So it used to be grow at all costs for companies like mine, where we're about 300 people now. And so we're not like a startup, but we're sort of in that mid range. And now there's going to be a lot more emphasis on margin. There's going to be a lot more emphasis on controlling costs. for us in particular, but just in general across the board, because money's no longer free to borrow. It's harder out there when you're in the pre-IPO world because lenders are very much more conservative. So that's one thing you need to really understand what your company values. And that's going to be hard because they'll say, hey, we want you to go fast and save money and have no bugs and have no security. And it's like they just want everything. But you have to really have them force rank sort of what is most important for the company at this moment right now and understand that. I will say that when
So,
you're small,
so
go ahead.
just a question there. That's talks to adaptability. So I'm
Yeah,
curious, because we tend to like stability as
yeah,
human beings, right? So that's a change. Now you had a particular goal. Now you're changing a little bit. So I'm curious if you can talk a little bit about how you help the organization adapt to these kinds of changes as well as you go
yeah.
into best practices there.
What is the saying? What got you here won't get you there. It's hard because we are generally change averse, even though we all. I mean, the whole point of agile is change is always coming, and you have to adapt, etc. But in general, there's a lot of who moved my cheese out there for people, and so like, wait a minute, I thought we were here to save money, and now all of a sudden you're saying you want us to be more innovative, right? So those changes will happen throughout the life cycle of a company, not just based on their growth, but just on the economics and what's going out in the marketplace. Could also be a lot of companies shift their priorities, shift their products, and you need to be able to communicate that well. I think the first thing is you repeat it, repeat it, repeat it, repeat it. It doesn't matter how often. Uh, you can't oversay it, and you should say it in as many different ways as possible because people really need to understand it. Um, Company values are a great thing. We have a few company values here. Two important ones are act like an owner, and one is find the better way. Now, it's important. Those values were in place before I came in as CTO, but it's very important for me to understand that because that has consequences, right? That what that's basically saying is we prize individuality, and we prize sort of team first. You're in control of your own destiny. Go. What we don't prize at the current time is a lot of coordination, a lot of making sure we're all going on the same time frame, using the exact same processes, because we are trusting our smaller squads in the development world and our smaller business teams to go out and solve the problems. That's the point of where we are, and that's what's gotten us here to make us go very quickly. But as I mentioned, now we are about 300 people strong. I think we were closer to 170 when I joined, and we have 13 different squads. We have shared services on the development side. So now coordination is a little more important because we've gotten to the point where a lot of product offerings can't be done simply by one squad pushing out what they want. They have to coordinate with another team on an architectural level or on a product offering level. Like maybe it's a front end team that services the savers, the people saving money that you need to coordinate when you are really about payroll ingestion. Whatever the case may be, coordination is becoming more important, and it has been over the last, I'd say, 3 or 4 months, and I can see it going that way. So I've got to start talking about that. Got to start talking about that as a value. Yes, we still value acting like an owner, but we need to understand that we rely on each other, and then transparency on what we're delivering or not delivering, or what we're prioritizing or not prioritizing, is increasingly important because we have an audience, right?
So Rob,
Does that make sense?
I'm curious how you balance that, right? Because we often collaboration and coordination gets confused with the need of consensus,
Yeah,
and a lot of organizations struggle with this idea of the difference between these three things.
yeah,
And so, in one aspect, act like an owner requires a lot of autonomy. At the same time, do things better, especially when you're moving faster. It does require coordination because you need to work together. So it's not about codependency as it is interdependency.
yeah,
So how have you struck that balance and helped the organization to realize, hey, it's not about consensus. You still
yeah.
have to move forward, but we need to coordinate things in such a way that we're proactive. What's worked for you in helping teams realize that it's not, analysis paralysis mindset, still
Yeah.
move forward, but coordinate. If you could share that, because I think a lot of organizations struggle with this aspect. So I'm curious to see what
Oh,
you
yeah.
have to say about it.
I've certainly struggled in it in my career. I've certainly made missteps along the way trying to navigate this transition because I see this transition often. So I know a lot of the bad ways to do it as well as the good. I think the first one is you had to come to a realization you're going from a position where you kind of let every garden grow on the individual squads. Maybe they use different statuses in their scrum or whatever, and maybe they have different pacing or what have you. You have to start getting to a little bit more consensus. You don't need to have one size fits all for everyone. And in fact, you never will probably be able to achieve that unless you're a giant company. But you need to tell them why you need the coordination. And for us, the first thing is visibility. So if you want to handle bugs differently in your workflow, that's okay. But we need to understand what your bug to production defect ratio is so that we can look across the entire organization and say, okay, are we spending enough on our quality efforts? Are there certain areas of the architecture that are in flames and we need to spend more attention to that are always produce defects when we release them? So that's the first thing. Tell them why. The second thing is I would never go with a top down, and I've done this before, just like, okay, this is what it's going to be. Everyone, 2 week scrums, no more Kanban, blah, 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 because people will rebel. You have smart people. Hopefully you've hired smarter people than you. And if they don't know the why, they're just going to pick it apart because, like you said, we don't like change, and change for no reason just feels like bureaucracy. And lack of trust, right? And that's something that can certainly filter down. You hear that we need to ship faster, and then people on the engineering side take that as a knock against them when it's not necessarily the culprit, right? Um, and I think that's part of my job also is kind of explaining the nuances of software development and why adding another person won't necessarily make things go faster and all those things to the non-tech executive. But in terms of making that transition, I think getting consensus is a better, or at least some partial consensus, even if you feel like you're leading a horse to water, is better than just dictating something. The other thing that can be your friend, and I saw a previous CTO when I was at Integral Ad Science brought this in, and he brought it in really well, was a framework. So he brought in SAFe, Scaled Agile. And that might not be for everyone, but what it really did was got consensus on the value and how to do things. And he did it brilliantly by getting the senior executive leadership to buy in before he even brought it down to the technical folks. So sometimes if you're in technology, you want to lead with Agile and lead with technology, but that might be counter to the company culture. And you got to be careful because then it'll just be dismissed as this little engineering thing. You kind of got to get full company buy-in for these transformations. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so let's just quickly recap a little bit before we move on to the next topic. We talked a little bit about having a good foundation for success, making sure there's alignment around the company's values,
Mm-hmm.
adapting to the environment based on what's going on, the microeconomics, as well as where the company's heading, making sure that there's a good agile foundation. Teams can work independently, but also work collaboratively, coordinate activities when necessary, gain consensus when necessary. Now, what's interesting about all this is you eventually get a well-oiled machine, right? It sounds like you've got that in place,
Yeah.
and then everybody's humming along, but somewhere along the line, there's a few folks that are thinking about what's next. so then,
Yes.
so that link in the chain, it's not a weak link. It's a link that's like, I'm thinking about what's next.
Yeah.
So, how do you balance succession planning and creating opportunities for growth in a fast changing environment like that, where you're relying on those teams to work well?
Yeah.
And then there's those folks who like, I want a next opportunity. What's next for me? How do you infuse that into the conversation?
I think that, well, there's a few things in there, and they're good questions. I think the career growth is an important one, right? I think it's been long acknowledged that for technologists, you need to support at least a dual track career growth where you can go up through people management or you can go up through technical leadership, architecture in some cases. And you need to be able to support people trying those paths and then going back if it doesn't work. You might have people think, I want to try to be a manager. And maybe they think of it wrongly as the only way to get ahead in your company, but regardless, they think they can do it. And then they might find that they're very, very unsatisfied with it and want to go back. And you need to allow for that without penalty. And that could be tricky. That can be tricky in saying, okay, well, maybe we need to change your salary back if you want to go back to being this position instead of, this director position. But it's worth it if you give people the opportunity to stretch themselves and decide that they don't like what they're doing. So I think that's an important thing right there. And then, like you said, the tracks are always changing ahead of us. So as soon as we get well oiled, expect the tracks to change, whether that's because you acquired a new company that you need to fold in, or you were acquired, or you're going public, or anything like that. So those are the things that I would call out as being very important.
Very
To
interesting. Very
Yeah,
interesting. Giving people a trial and out from what they thought was the next thing for
yeah,
them. Uh,
absolutely.
I can't tell you how many people I know have moved in a direction and then years later have felt like, I wish I could go back the other way, but it's too late because then people think
Yeah,
you're qualified. So that's a
yeah,
very interesting, very empathetic thing as well. So congratulations on that. We're coming up on wrap up. We're coming up on time. Um, in this whole environment,
yeah,
you're also dealing with different people, different views, different way of doing things from a personal perspective. How do you balance, having a good, inclusive, and diverse team that and in an advantageous way in terms of how you solve problems and how you create innovation because of different ideas and different views? What has been your experience on how to foster that and leverage that in a way that benefits everyone?
yeah. I think that I remember that early on, I didn't understand that I had the boss, invisible ink tattoo on my forehead. So I'd go into a technical discussion and I'd be like, well, why don't we just do it this way? And I was just asking, like, I wanted someone to say, no, it doesn't work this way because whatever. And of course, everyone's just like, well, Rob wants it this way, so we should do it this way. And I didn't understand the impact of that. So you have to really understand how people view you, and you got to give them the autonomy to make their own decisions, even if you disagree with it, as long as you've pressed them for the solution should they not work out. How are you going to back this out? But I think it's very hard. Um, you have a lot of different styles of communication that rub people the wrong way if they're not moderated. So I think understanding that is important. We did some training on that here at Vestwell, and I think it's very helpful. Some people want it, very direct. Some people want to be built to it, what have you. And understanding that and keeping that in mind, I think, is very important. And then seeking out diversity as an objective is important. And we have the Black Empowerment Network at my company that I'm a part of. Uh, um, we have a women's group. We have a LGBT group. We have other groups, ERGs, I guess you'd call them. And it's important to let those folks have an agenda and work and get some goals going on.
You said something very, thank you. You said something very interesting that requires significant amount of emotional intelligence for a leader
Yeah,
to not be a one size fits all in terms of how you deal with people
yeah,
and be adaptable. That's the clear message that I think has come through our conversation today is being adaptable, embracing change, and working collaboratively. And the other thing that stood out for me is the importance of a lot of autonomy. You're giving
yeah,
people a chance to figure things out on their own term, but not do it so independently where they don't think about how the interdependencies of working with others. So tough thing to balance out. Sounds like you've dialed it in well. So congratulations, Rob.
thank you.
Thanks for being with me this morning. I'm looking forward to the blog that will come out of this podcast conversation. It should be
Yeah,
very enlightening, and we'll share that with the community in the next couple of weeks. Stay with me as we go off the air in just a second. I'm going to announce we have a guest tomorrow again. His name is Gustavo Barbosa. He's the VP of Engineering at LoadSmart, and that's going to be tomorrow, Friday, the 21st, the same time, 9:30 a.m. Pacific. And we're going to talk about transparent leadership, growing teams under a culture of trust. So it's a good, I think, continuation of today's conversation about the importance of transparency and how that fosters a culture of trust. Because without trust, you just have people just doing a job. So thanks for being with me again today, Rob. Thanks for joining
Yep.
everyone, and I'll see you back again tomorrow.
Thank you.